Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. And I appreciate so very, very much you being with me. My name is Dante Preston. I am the president of Preterism Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And this morning, this is going to be video number 3 in response to Dr. Gavin Ortlund, who is a very popular, we might say, internet poster. He has videos all over YouTube. I think he has over 100,000 subscribers, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, very popular. He presents himself very well. And by the way, let me reiterate twice now I have posted invitations on his video against preterism, urging him, inviting him to meet me in formal debate. We can do this on any number of different platforms on the internet, and it will be a collegial, respectful, decorous dialogue. No name calling, no ugliness, certainly not on my part, just an important discussion. And if Dr. Ortlund would like to discuss, for instance, because in his first video, he focused on the subject of the millennium. And he really hung his hat. I mean, he mentioned the early church history, he mentioned the creeds, he mentioned, this, that, and the other, the Apostles' Creed. But where he really hung his hat was on the millennium. And his argument was, as a partial preterist, well, certainly there are passages that speak of things that were at hand, coming quickly, coming shortly and soon, and we have to honor those time statements. But then we come to Revelation chapter 20, and we've got this discussion of the millennium. Well, millennium is 1,000 years. And even if we take that in a symbolic sense of not a literal, actual, 999 plus 1 kind of mathematical calculation, it's still a really, really long period of time. So we have all these time statements in the book of Revelation about things that were to shortly come to pass, but then we supposedly have this statement that is supposedly a time statement, and it proves a long period of time. Well, first of all, and let me reiterate, I will be more than happy to debate Dr. Ortlund on the meaning and the application of the millennium. I believe the millennium was approximately 40 years from the ministry of Jesus until AD 70. I'm rounding that off. I'm just using round terminology as well. I'm not trying to be mathematically precise, but approximately a 40-year period of time. Dr. Ortlund believes that the millennium is so far 2,000 years. He believes it's the Christian age. And he says that he believes that in a yet future period of time, the earth and the elements that are therein, the physical material creation, is going to be burned up. And that's at the end of the Christian age. Now, what I want to do this morning is discuss this issue of the millennium. And I'm going to urge you to get a copy of this particular book. Now, I've already mentioned the fact that I am currently writing a book on the millennium. The working title is The Mystery of the Millennium Unveiled. And I'm getting pretty close. As I've been going back through and editing, I find more stuff. I need to put this in. I'm going to take this out. It's not as important as what I'm going to put in. And so I'm in that process, and it's exasperating, to be honest about it, because, pardon me, I would really love to leave everything in that I've actually put in, but space-wise, I'm not going to do that. So, get yourself a copy of this book, The Millennium, Past, Present, or Future, by Joseph Vincent. and it is a defense of the 40-year millennium. I was privileged to write a chapter in this book, and so you can get some of my thinking, some of my ideas in defense of the 40-year millennium by getting a copy of this book. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and just go to the store, look up the millennium, and order the book. All right, now then. So as I said, I want to discuss this morning the idea of the millennium being 40 years in duration. And again, I'm not being precise. Just keep that in mind. Now, one of the things that it is important to realize, and by the way, there are very scholarly articles in support of this. These articles are not written by full preterists. They're just simply written by men trying to understand the language of the Bible. One of the articles is on the long ages of the patriarchs. Another article is in the large numbers used in Scripture. A scholar by the name of Olson wrote the latter one. These PDF were sent to me by my good friend Robert Cruikshank. I call him my PDF guy. I'm all time looking for information, looking for good scholarly material, and I ask him, and boy, next thing I know, I'm getting all these wonderful PDFs. I don't know where he comes up with them. I don't find them like that. So anyway, extremely helpful PDFs. But one of the things that Dr. Olson points out is that it is now recognized in scholarship that the ancient Hebrews used numbers for a variety of different reasons. And they used large numbers for reasons other than mathematical precision, or even duration, or even, what should I say here, full meaning. In other words, when you got a number here, the idea is not math. And let's illustrate that. And by the way, Dr. Olson and the PDF does a great job of illustration after illustration after illustration. And what he is suggesting is that the Hebrews used large numbers to convey the idea of importance. Not duration, not numbers, but importance. And thus, one of the words that he uses, by the way, is the word majesty. Large numbers being used to describe the majesty, for instance, of some of the ancient kings who supposedly lived for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The biblical writers, or the ancient writers, ancient Near Eastern writers, were not trying to tell us, oh, this guy actually literally physically lived for 50,000 years. No, it's conveying the majesty of his reign, the power, the authority of his reign. Well, when we come to the Bible, we get the idea, it's a fact, that the biblical writers were not trying to convey numbers of years, or even actual numbers, even though they use numbers. And that may sound contradictory, but it's simply recognizing that they were using these large numbers to convey an idea of magnitude insofar as meaning is concerned. One example that is given among many is in Revelation chapter 9. Now, I don't have to tell you, and Dr. Ortlund would not be one of these individuals because he says he's a non-millennialist, a partial preterist. Well, that means that he's going to have to basically agree with me on what I'm about to present. In Revelation chapter 9, what do we find? We have an army of the kings of the earth who were gathered together to do war with the Messiah. And it is an army of 200 million horses. Soldiers mounted on 200 million horses. Now, I remember Harold Camping. I remember Jack Van Impe. I remember different of the television evangelists, all of these dispensationalists, and they'd run over here to Revelation chapter 9 and say, listen, the only nation that could ever assemble an army that big is China and Russia combined. And of course, they would assure us that the end, Armageddon, was just around the corner and it was going to take place in our generation. You remember Hal Lindsey, The Late Great Planet Earth? You remember Hal Lindsey's book, Israel 1948, Countdown to, 1948, Super Sign of the End, that he co-wrote with Timothy, not to me. Anyway, you get the point. Hal Lindsey told us China and Russia are going to be in a confederation and we're going to see an invasion of Israel. 200 million horsemen. And again, Jack Van Impe, DeMee, Harold Camping, and these others. Well, there's a problem. Listen to me. Anytime and every time you hear some dispensational writer going on and on and on about how imminent the day of the Lord is, how imminent the rapture is, how imminent Armageddon is, and we've got to be expecting an invasion of 200 million soldiers riding on horses. By the way, you got to take the Bible literally, don't you? Oh, well, unless you're talking about the scorpions of Revelation that may be Black Hawk helicopters. What happened to literalism? So anyway, here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, I've pointed this out in 2 different debates. The only response I got was scoffing, ridicule. I didn't get any attempted exegetical response. There is none. The problem with taking the biblical text literally in regard to 200 million. Now let's face it. If you're going to take the millennium as literal, then we need to take the number 200 million as literal, right? And if you're going to say, oh, we're looking for the literal Armageddon of 200 million soldiers riding on horses, then as the old saying goes, Houston, we have a problem. Why is that? Just before coming in, I already knew the number, but I wanted to confirm it. Just before coming into my studio to film this session, I did a search. What is the current population of horses in the world today? 2025. Do you know what the current population of horses in the entirety of the world is today? As I film this, 60 million. And do you realize that America has 1/6 of that entire population? Now, let me ask you, if the total population of horses in the world is 60 million, how could an invasion of Israel by 200 million horsemen be at hand? We would have to have a 3-fold plus multiplication of the number of horses. Oh, but that's not the only problem in the population of horses in the world. Because, I'm pretty certain America is not going to give all of its horses to China and Russia to invade Israel. I'm pretty sure that most of the nations in South America, where there are large numbers of horses, I'm pretty sure that even though some of those countries border on communism, most of them do not. They're not going to give their horses to China and Russia to facilitate and to build up a number. And even if they did, you couldn't reach 200 million horses. So why did the Spirit use the number 200 million? Now remember, Dr. Ortlund's going to have to agree with me on this. Dr. Ortlund does not believe, will not believe, virtually cannot believe that Revelation is talking about 200 million actually. Now, he might possibly retort and say, well, I'm not going to press the number 200 million, but it's still a large number. Okay. But it would have to be 3 times plus less than 200 million if it's talking about anything in our near future. You see the problem? The large number is simply being used to convey the idea of majesty and power and overwhelmingness, seemingly invulnerable. Well, when we come to the book of Revelation, what are we talking about? 1,000 years. Does that have to mean a literal 1,000 years? Dr. Ortlund doesn't believe so, because as I've already said, pointed out, he believes that the millennium is the Christian age. Therefore, it's at least twice as long as the millennium would indicate. Well, wait a minute. What that suggests, therefore, is the millennium is not indicative of a literal physical millennium. That number is being used to convey the glory and the majesty and the rule of Christ's kingdom on earth right now, regardless of how long. Now, let me shift gears. I hope you catch the power of that. Let me shift gears now in remaining few moments I'm going to take. And by the way, I want you to be looking for a very special video that Zach Davis and I are going to be doing on the millennium exclusively, as we do a very special devoted video in response to Dr. Ortlund. That video will be coming up in the very near future. It's not ready, hasn't even been filmed yet, but it's coming up in the very near future. So be watching for that as Zach Davis and I discuss the millennium. Okay, there's so many post-millennial tenets, elements, subjects, motifs that are found in Revelation chapter 20 and 21. And here is my argument. And in this book that I'm writing, which is The Mystery of the Millennium Unveiled, I adduce 9, listen to me, 9 post-millennial tenets, things that were going to come into existence at the end of the millennium, and every one of those elements, every one of those tenets was to come into existence at the time of the judgment of Old Covenant Israel that took place in 70 AD. Now listen, I'm not aware of another book even remotely resembling what I'm doing. It is truly going to be unique. You need to be looking forward to that. Some of the material that is in Joseph Vincent's book, some of it will be in this book, but far, far, far more than is in this book. Okay, I want to focus for just a few moments here on one tenet that takes place after the millennium, and that we can link directly to AD 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem. What is that element? What is that tenet? It is the wedding of the King of Kings, the wedding of Christ, the wedding of Messiah. Now, in Revelation chapter 18, we have the harlot city Babylon. She is depicted as saying, I am no widow. Revelation chapter 19. Meaning, not that she's saying my husband is not dead, but she could be a divorced wife. Because you see, in Isaiah chapter 54, when God refers to Old Covenant Israel as his wife that was being divorced, He promised that the time was going to come in which she would say, I am no widow. Revelation 19. Not that the husband had died, not at all, but that she was no longer divorced. Do you catch the power of that? Okay, so in Revelation chapter 18, we have this harlot city, and Jesus referred to Jerusalem and Judea as the adulterous generation. Well, I wonder what the Lord was going to do with an adulterous wife. Oh, he was going to do to that adulterous wife what he did to the adulterous wife of the 10 tribes of Israel in Hosea, in Jeremiah chapter 3. The Lord says of the 10 northern tribes, she is not my wife, I am not her husband. God wrote a bill of divorcement, divorcing the 10 northern tribes. Why? Because she's committed spiritual adultery. What do you think God was going to do with Jerusalem in the first century when Jesus said 3 times, a wicked and adulterous generation, referencing Jerusalem and Judea? So we have Revelation, this harlot wife. And by the way, the word that is translated as harlot, its equivalent word in the Old Testament, is used 91 times. 86 of those times, listen to me very carefully, 86 of those times it refers to a wife who had broken the marriage covenant and was being referred to as a harlot or prostitute. 86 out of 91 times. Now, the Old Testament Hebrew word, again, is the direct parallel to the New Testament word of harlot in Revelation. What does that tell us? That tells us that this city of Babylon, the harlot city, was a wife that had broken covenant, committed spiritual adultery, and was being divorced. But just like the 10 northern tribes, when God divorced her, he put her to death and he departed from her. That's Hosea 5 through 6. By the way, I cover all of this in great detail in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. Okay? Order a copy of that and I'll refund your shipping. Okay, so here is Judah, the harlot bride, going to be divorced, going to be destroyed. As a matter of fact, Revelation chapter 17, in the destruction of the city that rode upon the beast, she is burned and stoned, which was the punishment of a priest's wife in Leviticus that had committed adultery. Powerful stuff here. Well, God divorced the 10 tribes. God was going to divorce the 2 tribes. And yet God promised in his majesty and in his mercy that in the last days, Hosea chapter 2, the Lord said, I will betroth you to myself again. I will betroth you to me in righteousness. I will betroth you to me forever. However, there was a caveat. When he divorced her, he destroyed the kingdom. He would not destroy the family. And he made a promise that in the last days he would raise up again the tabernacle of David that was fallen down. In other words, he's going to restore Israel, but not like they had been. They were not going to be the same nation. They were going to be reconstituted. They were going to be redefined. They were going to be recreated into the image of Christ, the Messiah. And I've got to hurry here because, boy, I'm running out of time. Okay, so that's the story of Revelation 17, 18. But what happens in Revelation chapter 19 after the destruction of Babylon? Revelation chapter 19, verse 6. Let us rejoice, for the time of the wedding has come. Wedding when? Destruction of Babylon. Well, who is Babylon? It's the city where the Lord was crucified. Revelation 11 and 8. Now catch this. In Matthew chapter 22, a certain nobleman, a man, a king, made a great wedding feast for his son. Sent out his servants to call those who had already been invited. That's the force of the Greek text. Who was it that God promised and would call to the wedding? Going to remarry Israel. But those servants were mistreated, they were beaten, they were slain. The master of the vineyard sent out his armies to destroy those wicked men who killed his servants and burned their city. Donald Hagner, in the Word Biblical Commentary, says, commenting on Matthew chapter 22, verse 7, it is impossible to read this without thinking of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. I think he's absolutely correct. But what happens at the time of the destruction of that city? He then sent his servants and said, go out into the highways and the byways and call anyone and everyone to come in so that my wedding banquet may be full. At the destruction of the persecutors, ensuing immediately from it was the wedding. Destruction of Jerusalem, wedding. Revelation, destruction of Babylon, where the Lord was crucified. Wedding. Now watch. Revelation chapter 21. I, John, saw a new heaven and a new earth. And I saw a new Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven, adorned as a bride for her husband. And then again, in that very same chapter, I saw the new Jerusalem coming down, adorned as a bride for her husband. When is this? After the millennium. So, you have the destruction of Jerusalem followed by the wedding. Matthew 22, Revelation 18. But in Revelation 19 and 21, you have the wedding, once again following the destruction of Babylon, but you have the wedding after the millennium. Folks, we're not waiting for the end of the millennium for the wedding. The wedding was at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. Matthew 22, Revelation 18 and 19. So there's one concept. This singular post-millennial tenet just completely destroys the idea that the millennium was going to be so far 2,000 years away or in length. Out of time, listen, again, go to my website, order my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. In that book, I have an extensive discussion going all the way back into the Old Testament, the book of Hosea, the book of Jeremiah, the book of Isaiah, talking about Israel's marriage, Old Covenant Israel, her divorce, and her remarriage in the last days, recreated, reconstituted, but again, remarried as the body of Christ. Go to my bookstore, DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, order the book. Be sure you send me a note that says, hey, Don, I saw your video in response to Dr. Ortlund on the millennium and the wedding, and I'll refund your shipping. That's going to save you about $8.50. Over $9 actually with shipping cost being what it is. Okay, I am completely out of time. Thank you for joining me on this morning's Morning Musings and responding to the critics. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll see you on Monday.